Hey, welcome to the pilot episode of Stoppage Time with Uncle Rob. This is our short new weekly Roundup show where I'll drop into your feed every Friday afternoon to share my thoughts and opinions on 2 or 3 big current events or big topics that came into my world that week. Think of it as a less formal post-show conversation after recent episodes of our podcast, Entrepreneurial Thinkers. Why stoppage time with Uncle Rob? Well, if you know me at all, you know I absolutely love football, or as we call it here in the United States, soccer. And stoppage time is that little bit of extra time between the end of regulation and the actual end of a formal match. And I kind of feel like that's a Friday in our professional and our personal lives, right? We've got that little bit of extra time on a Friday afternoon between the end of most of our work week and the beginning of our relaxation and our disconnect on the weekend. And so I want to fill that time with a little bit of perspective on what we experienced during that week. It might be a little bit louder. I might be up and walking around like I'm about to do now, and I would definitely be giving you unfiltered opinions on the things that come through my life. So 3 topics this week. First things first, let's talk about women's sports. Second thing, we're going to talk about politics, kind of my belief system around the entrepreneurial thinking opportunities inside of politics. Third, we're going to talk about traditional media, and then I'm going to hit you with a little bonus every week where I'm going to drop a little commentary or recommendation about a book that I'm reading or listening to. First things first, women's sports. We are in our moment right now, right? This is an explosive growth of women's sports across the board. In my particular view, this last couple of weeks has highlighted 2 things. One, the astronomical growth of women's basketball, college basketball in particular. We're about to have the WNBA draft, where we're going to see a lot of these college stars that played such a huge part of all of our viewing experiences and our fandom experiences in the last month. We're going to see them get drafted into the professional league here in the United States and watch what goes along with that kind of growth now, right? Do we follow as an audience? Do we see viewership numbers in the WNBA start to grow like we've seen dramatically grow in women's college basketball? But it also made me think this last couple of weeks while I was watching this of the excitement and the growth and the economic growth around women's soccer, or football, as we would say, here in the United States. So we have the NWSL, the National Women's Soccer League, which has been in existence for 12, 13 years, I think. But only in this last 3-4 years has it begun to see kind of an explosive change in its coverage in media, in its economic value of its clubs, in the branding and entrepreneurial opportunities that are available to its leading players. We have a club right here in Los Angeles called Angel City, or ACFC, which I am a huge fan and supporter of. And one of the fascinating things about what Angel City has done, and now the San Diego Wave have done, and new clubs that are coming online in Boston and Utah, and ownership changes that have happened in the league with clubs in Seattle and in Chicago, is that we're seeing this massive in-migration of really talented super women investors and executive operators. And again, I think the combination of entrepreneurial thinking and the entrepreneurial economic activity that exists alongside of something that we all consume a ton of, which is live sports, and in this particular case, women's live sports, is long overdue. I think we're only going to see things go up and to the right from here. Frankly, personally, selfishly, as a girl dad, as a proud ally of all female founders, female investors, and women-based causes in this world, I think advertisers, sponsors, big media companies are 25 years late to the party. But they are now, and we are now, as a result of their changes and their decisions, we're all about to experience just massive growth in what is just fundamentally great entertainment and great sporting entertainment, right? And in a shifting world of media consumption habits, where live sports is one of the last or greatest opportunities for tremendous programming. It's the suspenseful storytelling that we all long for, right? It's the unscripted reality show, the original unscripted reality show, so to speak. I think it's going to be an amazing time over this next 25 to 50 years as we see women's sports across the board begin to catch up and even surpass, as we've seen in the women's NCAA basketball tournament viewership statistics in these last 3-4 weeks. We see it surpass men's sports in many ways. So that's awesome. That's good for everybody. That is, as I always say now, it's just good business, right? So that's a good win for everybody involved. Second topic, kind of bleed over a little bit, traditional media. So we had an incredible guest, a friend of mine who is the deputy editor in charge of opinion at El País, which is the world's largest Spanish language newspaper, kind of the Spanish language newspaper of record around the world. Pablo Jimenez joined me this past week on an episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers podcast. And we talked a ton about, was traditional media dead? Is traditional media dead? Is AI, are all these things coming to kind of wipe out traditional media, and we just have to accept it as consumers or as storytellers? And we examined that in depth. We went into it. You should listen to the episode if you're at all fascinated by these topics. But I'm here to tell you today, traditional media is not dead. In fact, what the conclusion we came to in the show was that more likely traditional media got sick and was really sick and is now in recovery mode, stabilizing, and has a pathway forward to be reinvigorated in a series of new business models in new, fresh ways to connect and engage with their best customers. So that's super exciting for me, since I've now committed the future of my professional life in building the Storytellers Company to tell great stories through our podcast, through television projects, through books, through live events where we dig in and look for the best undiscovered entrepreneurial stories to be told in this world. But it's also just good news for us as consumers, right? That we will wind up in a world where we will have choice, but it won't be so hyper fragmented that the numbers of choices become overwhelming. One of the analogies I made with a friend this week in a side conversation about that episode was the idea of like the Chinese food menu, right? Or the menu at an American restaurant, say like a Cheesecake Factory. There's just too much stuff, right? Then you can't decide. And that's kind of where we've gotten to in this point of hyper fragmentation, as Pablo Jimenez would say, in media. And I think we're going to see a retrenchment from that. We're going to see a consolidation around that. And that's all going to wind up producing better products for all of us as media consumers. So that's a great thing. So no, traditional media isn't dead. Secondarily, and my friend Leslie Feinstein actually tweeted about this morning, the idea that, is AI just going to be a replacement tool and product and movement, or is it something else? And the common sentiment from all the techno bros and technologist purists right now seems to be that AI is the great replacer. And I actually don't think that's true at all. I think AI is going to wind up over the next 20 years to prove to be an incredibly useful tool. I think it's going to be an incredibly important value add. And I think fundamentally, we're going to look back and realize that it was the great differentiator, not the great replacer. So at the end of the day, we, me, you, Leslie, everybody else, has the opportunity to tell our stories as human beings uniquely powerfully in a way that no tool, no software, no intelligent software is ever going to come along and be able to replicate, right? And replace. So to me, I think what we're going to see, and I've said this often lately in conversations with friends, I think we're going to see a quadrupling down, so to speak, on the value of great human experiences. I find one of the great ironies lately is that all the people that are prognosticating the death of humankind and human creativity and the entertainment industry and the information industry at the heels of AI, they're all prognosticating that from the stages at events where they're sitting next to other human beings, sharing their unique opinions that they formulate from their brains in those moments. And then they're prognosticating this to audiences of thousands of other human beings while they're all at events that then they go online and they promote and rave about the fact that post-pandemic, it's incredibly unique to be able to gather and connect with other human beings. And that can never be replaced. And so therefore, we even have to go back to being in the office together because that's the only way you can replicate the human experience. And so like on one side of their mouth, we're saying AI is going to replace everybody and everybody is useless. And the other side, we're basically screaming the virtues of the fact that we are constantly surrounded by everybody, right? So again, I think over time, it's an incredibly useful tool. We use it in some ways inside the podcast. I use it in some ways inside my business life. But I think it ultimately becomes the great differentiator. And then I therefore think there's an immense amount of new opportunities that come available for us to use to create high value premium human experiences. I've said for 20 years that I eventually thought that professional sports as an attendance event was going to become kind of what it's getting close to becoming now, which is basically unaffordable to the common average fan, but a premium VIP experience for those individuals or those corporates that can afford it, right? So I think that's going to continue to be the case in the world of media, in how we consume media, and how it relates to AI. Last big topic, politics. Man, if there's ever a topic that entrepreneurs don't like to talk about or like to pretend isn't important, or like to pretend that they can kind of innovate their way around or get past without having to be involved in it, it's politics. And I've long thought that that was nonsense. I said what I'm saying now to you back in the 1990s during the burst of Internet 1.0, and this notion that the private sector or the technology sector companies were going to be the people that were going to fix all our social ills. The reality is, I think local politics, national politics, politics in general, which is the combination of people around shared ideas to try and make progressive systems and improvements in their societies or their communities. I think that's the most entrepreneurial thing we can do. And now, just to prove how live and real these new Friday afternoon shows are going to be, you can hear the dogs barking outside of my house here at the park. But I think politics is a great opportunity for entrepreneurial thinking. I think politics is an incredible opportunity for entrepreneurial thinking young people to get involved in their communities, in their causes that they care about, behind the issues that are the most meaningful to them. Obviously, I believe ultimately the massive ills of society, climate, homelessness, economic inequality, crime, just pick your big topic things. These are not things that can be singularly solved by the government, nor are they things that can be singularly solved by the private sector. In fact, in political history, we have a tendency to kind of convince ourselves of narratives of the way that things became the way they are, that aren't always necessarily true. And I think the more engaged and involved we are on a localized basis, and the more informed we are overall, the more we will come to understand how much collaboration between the private and the public sector has actually driven most of what we would now generally consider to be like having been private sector capitalistic success. Even in the US, the context of our own history, right? There's a lot of mythology around the capitalistic democratic success story that we are, and that it was all driven, especially the technology economy that we live in, was all driven simply by, like 3 or 4 really innovative rich guys. And although that may be how it's functioning now, the truth is that the birth of even a place like Silicon Valley was rooted in public institutions like universities, private institutions like local universities, collaborations with the government in the United States, and particularly the Department of Defense post-World War II, coming in and asking a lot of the technology innovators at the time who were focused on things like radio and the like, and circuitry, to ask them to start to focus on things that would be more conducive to serving the national interests, i.e. the war movements. And so they spent a lot of government money, seeded a lot of what was innovation in our world in the United States. And now, though the private sector has taken that and run with that, we still exist in that world, right? We still have companies that largely benefit from the close collaboration between public sector and private sector. And that means we're all involved in politics, whether we whether we go vote or we don't vote, which you should vote, or whether we like to admit it or not. So I'm just going to suggest that we learn from this truth, and we pay attention to it as we go forward. And that leads quickly to my book recommendation, which is The Age of Revolutions, from 1600 to the Present by Fareed Zakaria. I'm reading it right now, and it's an incredibly simple, very easy to consume set of stories that kind of walk us through the greatest revolutionary moments in the history of our world. And they don't just center on the West or in the United States. And in fact, they don't. They de-emphasize some of the American revolutionary story in place of some of the actual real revolutionary stories that happened back as far as the 1600s, that led to the opportunities and the moments that we have in today's current society. So it's an awesome book. I'm really enjoying it. I think everybody should be a student of history. I wrote about that this week. I think it's a missing opportunity when we don't study and understand our history, as I just alluded to. And so that is it. So that's it. That's it for me. Like I said, I'm probably going to be a little louder. I'm probably going to be a bit more mobile. You might see me walk around my apartment. You might see me walking outside on the streets, as I do oftentimes. I might come to you from the desk here, like I'm about to sit down in at home. But generally, I'm going to drop into your feed on a weekly basis, and we're going to try and talk about the things that I encounter. We're going to talk about the things that you encounter, that we cross over with each other in our conversations. And I hope you find this a valuable, positive net add to your week as you live in that stoppage time between the end of our regular week and the beginning of our weekend. So thanks. Have a great weekend.